I'm what you might call a professional skeptic. For a living, I design and implement high-end integrated security solutions. That's a fancy way of saying I help people with way too much money or way too many secrets protect their assets from people who want to take them. My clients range from corporations worried about industrial espionage to reclusive billionaires who think a tastefully hidden laser grid is a reasonable home improvement. My job is to think like a thief, a spy, or a kidnapper, and then build a fortress of technology to make their lives impossibly difficult. It's a career that has left me with two things: a healthy nest egg and a deeply ingrained habit of planning for the worst-case scenario. So, when I bought a house in what was advertised as a peaceful, private, gated community, I naturally applied my professional paranoia to my own sanctuary. The story of how my meticulously designed personal security system ended up systematically dismantling our HOA president's little suburban dictatorship is, I think, a pretty good one. It's a tale of hubris, incompetence, and the glorious, undeniable beauty of high-resolution, time-stamped video evidence. Before we dive into the crazy, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. The HOA president, a woman we'll call Brenda, probably holds the world record for the fastest transition from community leader to police suspect on her own misguided authority, and it all happened on my front lawn at 2 in the morning. My house was my sanctuary, but also my showroom. It was a modest-looking place from the outside, a comfortable 2-story brick home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. But beneath that unassuming facade, it was a fortress. I had thermal imaging cameras with overlapping fields of view, pressure sensors buried under the gravel paths, directional microphones that could pick up a whisper at 50 yards, and a server rack in my basement that quietly hummed as it processed terabytes of data. The system was designed to be discreet, but absolute. It wasn't about obnoxious sirens and floodlights that would annoy the neighbors. It was about information and control. It would alert me silently on my phone, showing me exactly who was approaching, from where, and with what potential intent, long before they ever reached the door. It was, if I do say so myself, a work of art, and I, its creator, was its only user. It was my property, my privacy, and my system. Enter Brenda. Brenda was the self-appointed queen of our little enclave, a woman who seemed to believe the president title on her HOA name badge granted her powers just shy of a federal judge. She drove a gleaming, perpetually spotless white Range Rover, always wore expensive athletic wear that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat, and had a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Her husband, a perpetually startled-looking man named Gary, trailed in her wake like a pilot fish. Brenda's reign was one of micromanagement and arbitrary enforcement. She had a particular obsession with aesthetics, once leaving a passive-aggressive note on a neighbor's door because their welcome mat was, and I quote, thematically inconsistent with the neighborhood's autumnal palette. My first interaction with her was pleasant enough: a welcome basket with cheap wine and stale crackers, accompanied by a 3-inch binder of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I read the entire binder, of course. It's what I do. I analyze systems for vulnerabilities, and an HOA rulebook is just a low-tech operating system for a community. It was mostly standard stuff: lawn maintenance schedules, trash can visibility rules, prohibitions on farm animals. Nothing about security systems, other than a vague clause that any external modifications needed architectural review. Since all my cameras were miniature, paint-matched to the trim, and virtually invisible, I didn't give it a second thought. The trouble started about 6 months in, with a newsletter. Tucked between an announcement for a potluck and a reminder to scoop pet waste was a new section titled Community Security, Harmonious Living. It was written in Brenda's signature style of condescending legalese. It spoke of the need for standardized and approved security measures to ensure they do not create a nuisance or infringe upon the privacy of fellow residents. It mentioned that unapproved systems with excessive surveillance capabilities were under review, There was no vote, no meeting mentioned, just this vague proclamation. I knew immediately it was directed at me. Someone, probably Brenda on one of her royal patrols, had likely spotted one of my less than perfectly hidden cameras. A week later, I got the first official letter. It was formal, on HOA letterhead, and informed me that my property had been flagged for a potential CCR violation regarding unapproved technological installations. It demanded I submit a full schematic of my security system, including camera locations, specifications, and data storage methods, for review by the Architectural Control Committee. The committee, I would later learn, consisted of Brenda, her husband Gary, and a terrified-looking woman who ran the neighborhood book club. The idea of submitting my security blueprint, the very thing I was paid top dollar to keep secreto, a triumvirate of unqualified busybodies, was laughable. It was a non-starter. I responded with a polite, professionally worded letter. I stated that my system was for personal security, fully contained on my property, and that all visible components were discrete and in compliance with the existing bylaws. I assured them it created no nuisance and did not infringe on any neighbor's privacy, as it was aimed exclusively at my own house and yard. I respectfully declined to provide a schematic, citing privacy and security concerns. I thought that would be the end of it. A reasonable, logical pushback. But I was dealing with Brenda, and logic was not her native language. Her native language was control. Her response came not in a letter, but in person. She appeared at my door one Saturday afternoon, Gary hovering a few feet behind her on the sidewalk. I saw them coming on my phone a full minute before they rang the bell. "I received your letter," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "It's not acceptable. The committee needs to review your system to ensure it's not a problem." I asked her to define what kind of problem she anticipated. She waved a dismissive hand. "Privacy, for one. We don't want residents spying on each other. And nuisance alarms. We have an approved vendor for alarm systems. If everyone just installs whatever they want, it will be chaos." I explained, slowly and calmly, as one might to a particularly dense child, that my system was silent. It didn't have external alarms. It alerted me, and only me. "And how can we be sure of that?" she challenged, crossing her arms. "We need to verify. We need to know what you can see." I held my ground. "Brenda, with all due respect, what I can see on my own property is my business. The system is designed by a professional meadow, be unobtrusive." "It is." Her eyes narrowed. "This is not over," she said, turning on her heel. "The HOA has a right to ensure the safety and harmony of this community. We will take steps to verify compliance." Gary gave me a quick, apologetic shrug before scurrying after her. That was when I knew this was going to escalate. Her words, "verify compliance," echoed in my mind. I had a sudden, chilling premonition of what a person like Brenda, convinced of her own authority, might interpret that to mean. I went to my basement, pulled up my system diagnostics, and initiated a new protocol I labeled Brenda. It heightened the sensitivity of the perimeter analytics and set up a special, detailed recording and logging sequence for the front yard. I had a feeling I was going to need it. The next 2 weeks were quiet, a tense sort of Cold War. I received another letter, this one more demanding, threatening fines if I didn't comply within 30 days. I filed it away with the first one. I knew I was on solid legal ground. The bylaws were on my side. But I was also dealing with someone who clearly saw those bylaws as mere suggestions. The calm before the storm broke on a Tuesday night, or rather, a Wednesday morning, at precisely 2:17 a.m. I was asleep when my smartwatch buzzed with a silent, insistent vibration. I glanced at the screen. Perimeter alert. Zone 1. Front walkway. Multiple events. Protocol Brenda. Active. I was wide awake in an instant. I rolled over, grabbed the tablet from my nightstand, and tapped the screen. The live feed from 4 different angles popped up, and there she was. Queen Brenda of the cul-de-sac, dressed in all black like a cat burglar from a bad 1960s movie, creeping across my lawn. She was moving slowly, deliberately, trying to stick to the shadows. It was so absurd I almost laughed out loud. She was actually trying to sneak up on my house. She was verifying compliance. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer audacity. The system was tracking her every move. A small green box highlighted her on the thermal feed, while the night vision cameras captured the look of intense, misplaced concentration on her face. She avoided the gravel path smart, I'll give her that, and was making her way through the soft grass toward the shrubs under my office window. She clearly had a destination in mind. She paused, looked back toward the street as if to see if anyone was watching, and then took another step. That step landed her squarely on one of the buried pressure sensors. It was a trap designed not to be obvious, but to confirm intent. A casual visitor would stick to the path. Someone trying to skirt visibility would step exactly where she did. The system, as designed, responded, not with a klaxon, but with something far more personal. A single, high-intensity LED strobe, concealed in the soffit above the window, flashed twice, directly at her. It was blindingly bright, but utterly silent. Simultaneously, a directional speaker, no larger than a deck of cards and also hidden in the soffit, emitted a focused beam of sound, a sharp, 15 kHz tone. It was highly unpleasant, like a dog whistle for humans, but you could only hear it if you were standing in a very specific 5-foot circle exactly where she was. To anyone else, even 20 feet away, it was complete silence. She yelped and threw her hands over her face, stumbling backward out of the sound field. The system logged the event. Subject identified. Deterrent deployed. Subject retreated. I could have stopped it there. I could have just saved the footage and used it later. But this was a flagrant, arrogant violation. She wasn't just some kid cutting across the lawn. She was an authority figure, trespassing in the dead of night to intimidate a resident. So I initiated the next phase. I tapped the microphone icon on my tablet and spoke into the two-way comms unit built into the camera near my front door. My voice, calm and clear, cut through the night silence. "Brenda," I said, "you are trespassing on private property. The police have been notified." This was, at the time, a bluff. I hadn't called them yet. I wanted to see what she would do. What she did was pure, unadulterated panic. She froze like a deer in headlights, spun around, and stared wildly at my dark house. She couldn't tell where my voice was coming from. It was the voice of an unseen, all-knowing God, and it had called her by name. "This is an official HOA inspection." She screeched into the darkness, her voice trembling. "I have a right to be here." "You have no such right, Brenda," I said, my voice still perfectly level. "You are on my property, without my permission, at 2:20 in the morning. That is the literal definition of trespassing. Leave now." For a moment, she seemed to consider arguing with the disembodied voice. The absurdity of the situation was reaching new heights. Then, a new kind of logic seemed to dawn on her, the logic of a cornered narcissist. If she was caught, she couldn't be the one in the wrong. Someone else had to be. She straightened up, a new, righteous fury replacing her fear. She pulled out her phone, the screen illuminating her face in a ghoulish glow. "You're harassing me," she yelled, now performing for an imaginary audience. "Your crazy security system is a menace. I'm the one who's calling the police." And then, to my utter astonishment, she did. I watched on my cameras as she frantically dialed 911, her voice a torrent of panicked accusations against me. The bluff had just become a reality, but not in the way I expected. The HOA president, caught trespassing on my property, was calling the cops on me. I leaned back against my pillows, took a deep breath, and started saving the video files to a secure cloud server. This was going to be an interesting conversation. I had about 8 minutes before the local police would arrive. It was ample time. I didn't rush. I got out of bed, put on a pair of jeans and a polo shirt, and made a cup of coffee. I clipped the relevant video segments: Brenda's stealthy arrival, her deliberate path across the lawn, the moment the strobe and directional audio activated, her panicked reaction, her shouted, "Official inspection excuse," and finally, her frantic 911 call. I compiled them into a single, chronological file and loaded it onto a tablet. I also pulled up the relevant page from the HOA bylaws binder on a separate screen, the one defining common areas versus private property, just in case there was any confusion. By the time I saw the flashing blue and red lights wash over my neighbor's house down the street, I was sitting calmly in my living room, tablet on the coffee table, ready to have a very factual, very one-sided conversation. When the doorbell rang, I let it ring twice before answering. I wanted to make sure they had plenty of time to get Brenda's full, unadulterated version of events first. I could see her on my front step camera, gesturing wildly, her voice a high-pitched stream of victimhood. She was pointing at my house as if it were a villain's lair, probably describing my menacing and harassing security system. I opened the door to find two officers on my porch. One was older, with a weary, seen-it-all look on his face. The other was younger, looking more confused than anything. Brenda was standing just off to the side, arms crossed, radiating smug indignation. She had a captive audience, and clearly thought she was in control. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" the older officer asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Yes, I am," I said calmly. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" Brenda jumped in before he could respond. "Yes, there's a problem. This man is harassing me. His security system attacked me. It's a public nuisance. I am the president of the Homeowners Association, and I was performing a safety inspection of the community grounds when he targeted me." The older officer held up a hand to silence her, a motion that was clearly practiced. He turned back to me. "Ma'am, please let me handle this." "Sir, we received a call from Miss Thompson here," he said, nodding toward Brenda, "alleging that you are harassing her with your security system. She states you have floodlights and sirens that you activated specifically to torment her while she was on the common area sidewalk." I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "I see," I said. "Well, that is certainly a version of what happened," Brenda huffed. "It's exactly what happened. I demand you make him dismantle this illegal system." I ignored her and addressed the officer directly. "Officer, I'd be happy to clear this up. In fact, I have a complete recording of the incident, from multiple angles, with timestamps. Would you like to see it?" The older officer's eyebrows went up. The younger one exchanged a quick glance with him. This was clearly not what they were expecting. "You have video?" the older one asked. "Yes, sir. High definition. It might provide some necessary context to Ms. Thompson's complaint." I stepped back and gestured toward my living room. "Please come in. I have it ready for you on a tablet." Brenda sputtered. "You can't. That's an invasion of my privacy." The officer gave her a tired look. "Ma'am, he's offering to show us evidence related to the call you made. Please, wait outside." He and his partner stepped inside, and I closed the door, leaving Brenda fuming on my porch. The sweet, satisfying click of the deadbolt was music to my ears. I handed the tablet to the officer. "The file is open, just press play." I stood back and let the video do the talking. They watched in silence. They saw Brenda, dressed in black, creeping across my lawn. They saw her avoid the walkway. They saw her step on the sensor. They saw the silent, localized strobe flash, and saw her yelp and jump back from a sound they couldn't hear. They heard my disembodied voice, calm and clear, identifying her and informing her she was trespassing. Then they heard her shouted, panicked defense. "This is an official HOA inspection." Finally, they watched the footage of her, standing in my yard, calling 911 to report me. The entire incident, from start to finish, laid bare in indisputable digital clarity. When the video ended, the older officer looked up from the tablet, then over at me. A slow, subtle smile played on his lips. He was trying to maintain his professional composure, but I could see the amusement in his eyes. "A safety inspection," he said, his voice dripping with dry sarcasm. "At 2:17 a.m. in the grass." He handed the tablet back to me. "Sir, your security system, the light and the noise, are they localized?" "Completely," I confirmed. "The strobe is a narrow beam, and the audio is parametric. You have to be in a very specific spot to hear it. It's a deterrent, not a public alarm. It's designed to make one person, a potential intruder, very uncomfortable without disturbing anyone else. He nodded, impressed. And your voice? Through a small speaker by the front door. Well, sir, he said, his tone shifting from investigatory to conversational. Thank you for clearing that up. It seems Ms. Thompson may have omitted a few key details from her report, specifically, the part where she was trespassing on your private property. He opened the door. Brenda was right there, ear practically pressed against it. She looked at the officer expectantly, as if she was waiting for him to emerge with me in handcuffs. Miss Thompson, the officer said, his voice now firm and official. We've reviewed the situation. Sir, he nodded to me. Your security system appears to be functioning on your own property. You're not in violation of any noise ordinance or harassment statute. Brenda's face fell. What? But he attacked me. No, ma'am. The officer corrected her, his patience clearly exhausted. What happened is that you chose to walk across a private lawn in the middle of the night, and a security device on that private property activated. Then, the homeowner asked you to leave. You, in fact, were the one committing an offense here. It's called criminal trespass. The color drained from Brenda's face. The words, criminal trespass, hung in the air like a foul odor. I'm the HOA president, she stammered, as if that was a magical incantation that negated all laws. That doesn't give you the right to enter a resident's property without permission, especially not at this hour, the younger officer chimed in. The homeowner would be well within his rights to press charges against you. My moment had arrived. The officers were looking at me. Brenda was looking at me, a mixture of fear and fury in her eyes. I could have done it. I could have pressed charges and had her cited, maybe even arrested, right there on my porch. It would have been a sweet, immediate victory. But I am a man who plans for the long game. A trespassing charge would be a slap on the wrist. It would make her a martyr in her own mind. It would end this battle, but it wouldn't win the war. I wanted more than just to be right. I wanted to dismantle the entire corrupt system she had built. So, I gave a magnanimous sigh. Officers, thank you for your time. I appreciate you clarifying the law for Ms. Thompson. As for pressing charges, I think we can consider this a learning experience for everyone. I looked directly at Brenda. I won't press charges tonight. I trust this sort of safety inspection won't be necessary again. The relief that washed over her face was quickly replaced by a renewed scowl of impotent anger. She had been publicly dressed down, legally cornered, and then patronizingly let off the hook. It was a far more exquisite humiliation than an arrest would have been. The officers, seeming relieved to be done with this suburban psychodrama, gave her a final warning, to go home and not return to my property. They tipped their hats to me and left. Brenda shot me a look of pure venom, a silent promise that this was far from over, before stalking off into the darkness toward her own home. As I watched her go, I knew she was right. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning, and she had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The war for the soul of the cul-de-sac had officially begun. The immediate aftermath of what I privately dubbed Operation Midnight Inspection was a period of eerie silence. Brenda didn't speak to me. She didn't send any more letters about my security system. When her white Range Rover glided past my house on her daily patrols, her head remained rigidly facing forward, a silent, stony refusal to acknowledge my existence. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. I knew she wasn't letting it go. A person with an ego as fragile and inflated as hers doesn't just absorb a public humiliation like that and move on. She was retreating, regrouping, and planning her revenge. I, in turn, began my own preparations. Her trespass was the inciting incident, the casus belli, but I knew her counterattack wouldn't be so direct. She would use the weapon she felt she controlled completely, the HOA itself. The first volley came exactly 29 days later, just under the wire of the 30-day compliance window from her last threatening letter. It was a crisp, white envelope in my mailbox, bearing the HOA's professionally printed logo. Inside wasn't a letter, but an official notice of fine. I had been fined $100 for failure to comply with an architectural committee directive referencing the demand for my security system schematics. The notice stated that the fine would double every 30 days it went unpaid. A week after that, a second notice arrived. A $50 fine for improper lawn maintenance. My crime? The letter cited a single eagle-eyed observation that the grass bordering my driveway was, and I have saved the letter to prove it, visibly exceeding the 3-inch maximum height standard by approximately 1/4 of an inch. It was accompanied by a blurry, zoomed-in photograph of a few blades of grass next to a curb. This was her new strategy. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. She couldn't get me on the security system directly, not after the police had sided with me. So, she was going to bleed me dry with petty, manufactured violations, enforced with the full, unquestioning power of the HOA board. She was banking on the idea that I, like most people, would eventually get tired of the constant harassment and either pay the ridiculous fines or just move away. She fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. I don't get tired of fights like this. I get methodical. My first step was to treat the HOA not as a neighborhood association, but as a hostile entity. I began documenting everything. Every fine notice was scanned and saved in a dated folder. I took my own weekly time-stamped photos of my entire property to preemptively counter any new accusations. I mounted a small, discreet camera with a wide-angle lens inside my garage, aimed at the street. It was positioned to capture a clear view of anyone lingering near my property line or mailbox. I even started a detailed log, noting every time Brenda's Range Rover passed my house, the time of day, and how long it paused at the end of the cul-de-sac. It felt like overkill, but my professional life had taught me that there is no such thing as too much data when you're building a case. My next step was to go on the offensive, but not in the way she expected. I wasn't going to argue about grass height. That was her game, and playing it would be a waste of time. I needed to change the battlefield. I needed to investigate the entity she was using as a weapon, the HOA itself. According to the binder she had so graciously provided me upon my arrival, all homeowners were entitled to review the association's records, including meeting minutes and financial statements, with reasonable notice. So, I drafted another polite, professional letter. This time it was addressed to the HOA Board of Directors, care of Brenda. In it, I formally requested copies of the last 2 years of board meeting minutes, the complete and detailed financial records, for the same period, including all budgets, income statements, balance sheets, and a general ledger of all expenditures, and a copy of the current contract with the neighborhood's landscaping company. The response was telling. A full 2 weeks went by, with no answer at all. Then, I received a letter not from the board, but from Brenda alone. It was curt and dismissive. She stated that my request was overly broad and burdensome, and that providing such extensive documentation was not feasible. She included a 1-page financial summary for the previous year, a document so vague it was laughable. It had line items like landscaping, 80,000, and administrative costs, 25,000, with no further detail. It was an insult disguised as compliance. Her refusal was exactly the red flag I was looking for. Legitimate organizations don't hide their books. Her defensiveness confirmed my suspicion. She was hiding something. The landscaping contract was likely the key. That 80,000 figure for a neighborhood our size seemed wildly inflated. Now I needed allies. I couldn't be the lone crazy guy fighting the HOA. I needed to know if other residents felt the same way. I started taking evening walks, making a point to be friendly. I struck up a conversation with a man named David, who was a few houses down. He was a retired accountant, quiet and observant. I started by mentioning the recent fine for my lawn. He chuckled grimly. "Ah, the grass police," he said. "Yeah, she got me last month for my garbage can being visible from the street for 2 hours after the pickup." I asked him if it had always been this way. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It started when Brenda took over 3 years ago. The old president was a live and let live type. Brenda, she treats this place like her personal kingdom. Most people just pay the fines to avoid the headache. It's easier. I told him about my request for the financial records and her refusal. His eyes, the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years looking for discrepancies in spreadsheets, lit up with interest. She refused? Said it was burdensome? He asked. The bylaws are explicit. She has to provide them. That's very, very unusual. I asked him about the landscaping budget. 80 grand a year? He whistled. For mowing a few common areas and trimming some bushes, that's steep. Really steep. I had found my first ally. David was intrigued. He had the skills and the quiet indignation of a man who hates seeing numbers being abused. He agreed to help me analyze the financials, if I could ever get my hands on them. A few days later, I was talking to another neighbor, a woman named Sarah, who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. I brought up Brenda, and she rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain something. Queen Brenda, she sighed. Be careful with her. She holds grudges. I told her about the midnight inspection. Sarah gasped, then started laughing. Oh my God, she actually did that? That is insane, even for her. Then her expression turned more serious. You know, the landscaping company we use, Brenda's Blooming Business or something like that, they started right after she became president. I always thought that was a weird coincidence. The pieces were clicking into place. A ridiculously inflated landscaping budget. A new landscaping company with a name suspiciously similar to our dear leaders. A steadfast refusal to provide any detailed financial records or the contract itself. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This smelled like outright fraud. Brenda wasn't just fining me out of spite. She was defending a lucrative and likely illegal enterprise. The fines weren't just about punishing me. They were about protecting her income stream. My fight was no longer just about a security system and my personal privacy. It had become a mission to expose a corrupt little regime, and I had the skills, the motivation, and now the allies to do it. The war was about to enter a new, far more dangerous phase. I wasn't just fighting fines anymore. I was launching a full-blown forensic investigation. My next move required a bit more finesse than simply sending letters. Brenda had stonewalled my request for financial documents through official channels, so I had to find a back door. The HOA bylaws, my trusty source of truth, stated that any board member could access all records at any time. The board consisted of 5 members: Brenda, her husband Gary, the terrified book club lady whose name was Martha, and 2 other homeowners I didn't know well. Getting to Gary was pointless. Martha seemed too intimidated to act. That left the other 2, a man named Robert, who worked in sales and was rarely home, and a woman named Carol, a retired school teacher. Carol was my target. I'd seen her at neighborhood potlucks. She seemed pleasant, if a bit non-confrontational. I approached her one afternoon while she was tending her prize-winning roses. I didn't lead with accusations. I started by complimenting her garden, then gently steered the conversation toward the HOA. I mentioned the recent flurry of fines and the general feeling of unease in the neighborhood. She sighed, wiping a bit of dirt from her brow. It has gotten a bit intense lately, she admitted. Brenda is very passionate about the rules. Passionate is one word for it, I said, allowing a bit of dry humor into my voice. I then told her about my formal request for the financials and Brenda's official refusal. I watched Carol's face carefully. A flicker of concern crossed her features. She refused? The whole board is supposed to have access to that, she said, confirming what I already knew. I asked her about the budget at the last meeting, just the total numbers, and she said she'd email a summary. That must have been the one-page thing you got. I pressed gently. Carol, as a board member, you have a right of fiduciary duty. In facto, review those records in detail. The landscaping budget alone seems incredibly high for a community our size. Don't you think it's worth a closer look, just for the sake of transparency? I could see the internal conflict on her face. She was not a natural boat rocker, but she was also a fundamentally honest person who had been a public servant her whole life. The idea that something wasn't right was clearly bothering her. I suppose I could ask again, she said hesitantly. Brenda handles all the financials. She has the password for the online banking and the QuickBooks account. The password. That was the key. Brenda had made herself the sole gatekeeper. This was more than just poor governance. It was a deliberate consolidation of control. I handed Carol a card with my phone number and email address. Look, I'm not asking you to lead a rebellion. I'm just asking you to fulfill your duty as a board member. The bylaws empower you to see those records. If you can get them, I have a friend. I gestured vaguely down the street in David's direction, who's a retired CPA. He's offered to look them over, pro bono, just to make sure everything is on the level for the good of the community. I framed it as a community service, a way to protect the homeowners, including herself. It wasn't about attacking Brenda, it was about ensuring responsible stewardship. The appeal to her sense of duty worked. She nodded, a new resolve in her eyes. You're right, she said. I'll demand access at the next board meeting. That meeting was a week away. In the meantime, David the accountant and I laid our own groundwork. We researched public business filings with the state. And there it was, under a list of newly registered LLCs from 2.5 years ago, Brenda's Blooming Business, LLC. The registered agent and sole officer listed was a man named Frank Miller. A quick, perfectly legal public record search on Frank Miller revealed his address. A cross-reference on a social media site showed a picture of him at a family barbecue, arms slung around a beaming Brenda. The caption read, "Great time celebrating with my favorite cousin, Bren." The smoking gun was practically smoldering in my hand. Brenda had awarded an exclusive, no-bid, $80,000 a year contract to her cousin. It was the most classic, textbook case of self-dealing I could have imagined. But I still needed the contract itself and the payment records to prove it. The board meeting, according to the bylaws, was open to homeowners for observation. David and I both attended. It was held in a small, sterile community room near the front gate. Brenda sat at the head of the table, flanked by a nervous-looking Gary and Martha. Robert, the sales guy, had called in and was on speakerphone. Carol sat at the far end, looking determined. The first part of the meeting was a masterclass in Brenda's autocratic style. She breezed through the agenda, barely allowing for discussion. Motion to approve the minutes from last meeting, all in favor. Great. Motion to approve the purchase of new holiday decorations, all in favor. Fantastic. When she got to the financials, she started to say, the financial summary was distributed, but Carol cut her off. Brenda, I'd like to see the detailed transaction ledger, Carol said, her voice clear and steady. The room went silent. Brenda froze, her pen hovering over her notes. Carol, we've been over this. The summary is sufficient for our purposes. No, Carol said, her voice gaining strength. It's not. As a board member, I have a right to review the detailed financials. I am formally requesting you give me the login credentials for the accounting software and the bank account right now. Brenda's face flushed a deep, angry red. This is highly irregular, she hissed. Robert's voice crackled over the speakerphone. What's the issue, Bren? Just give her the password. Brenda was cornered. In front of other board members and 2 observing homeowners, she couldn't flat-out refuse a legitimate request from a fellow board member. Theatrically, she sighed as if this were a massive imposition, tore a piece of paper from her notepad, scribbled something on it, and slid it down the table to Carol with a look that could curdle milk. Fine, she snapped, but I expect a report on any of your concerns. Carol simply folded the paper, put it in her purse, and said, Thank you, I'll be thorough. That night, Carol, David, and I huddled around David's dining room table, his laptop open. We were in. With the password, we had access to everything. The QuickBooks account was a mess, but David navigated it like a seasoned explorer. It didn't take him long to find what we were looking for. The contract with Brenda's Blooming Business was there, saved as a PDF. It was even worse than I imagined. It was an evergreen contract, meaning it renewed automatically every year unless the board actively voted to terminate it. And it had been signed not by the board, but by Brenda alone, claiming presidential authority for operational expenditures. Then David dug into the general ledger. "Oh, this is good," he muttered, leaning closer to the screen. "This is very, very good." He showed us the payment history. Every month, a payment of exactly $666.67 went to Brenda's blooming business. But there was more. We found invoices from the company for additional services, things like seasonal mulching for 50, aeration and overseeding for 7500, emergency storm debris cleanup for 10, after a storm that had barely knocked a few leaves off the trees. The total payments for the last full year were not 80. They were over 120. Brenda was using our HOA dues to line her cousin's pockets, and who knew, maybe her own through kickbacks. But the real smoking gun, the piece of evidence that elevated this from simple corruption to outright felony, was something David found in the archived documents. It was the minutes from the board meeting 3 years prior, the one where the landscaping contract would have been discussed. The official minutes Carol had in her binder showed a simple line. The board authorized the president to seek and approve a new landscaping vendor. But the version saved on the HOA's computer, the original Word document file, had its revision history enabled, a feature most people don't even know exists. And in that revision history, we could see the original text. The original motion read, "The board authorized the president to seek 3 competitive bids for a new landscaping vendor to be presented for a vote at the next meeting." Brenda had deliberately altered the official record to give herself unilateral authority. She had falsified a legal document. We had it all: the trespass video, the harassment fines, the evidence of self-dealing with her cousin's company, the wildly inflated invoices, and now, felony document fraud. We spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything into a single, devastating presentation. We made copies of the bank statements, the invoices, the original contract, and a side-by-side comparison of the original and altered meeting minutes. We prepared a financial summary showing how much the community had overpaid compared to standard market rates, which David calculated to be nearly 50 per year. The annual all-hands homeowner meeting was in 3 weeks. Brenda would be running for re-election as president, unopposed as usual. She was planning a coronation. We were planning a revolution. The night of the annual homeowners meeting was thick with a kind of manufactured cheerfulness. It was held in a rented ballroom at a local hotel, an expense Brenda justified as necessary to project a premium image for the community. She stood at a podium at the front of the room, resplendent in a royal blue pantsuit, beaming at the 50 or so residents who had shown up. Most were there for the free cheese and crackers and the wine that was slightly better than the welcome basket vintage. Gary and Martha were at the head table with her, looking like courtiers at the Queen's Gala. Carol sat quietly in the front row, giving me a small, nervous nod as I took a seat near the back with David. I had a laptop bag with me, containing my computer and a small, powerful projector. Brenda began the meeting with a glowing summary of her accomplishments over the past year. She spoke of increased property values, successful community events, and the diligent enforcement of standards that protect our shared investment. She painted a picture of a thriving, harmonious community under her wise and benevolent leadership. When she mentioned the budget, she smiled brightly. "Thanks to our prudent financial management," she declared, "our community is in its strongest fiscal position ever. We have a healthy reserve fund, and all our service contracts are providing excellent value." David and I exchanged a look. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. After her speech, she opened the floor for the election of the new board. As expected, she was the only nominee for president. She was about to call for a voice vote, a quick all in favor that would rubber stamp her for another term, when Carol stood up. "Before we vote," Carol said, her voice shaking slightly but clear, "I believe there is some information regarding the association's finances that every homeowner here needs to be aware of." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's smile tightened into a thin, hard line. "Carol, this is not the time or the place for this," she said, her voice low and threatening. "Any concerns should have been brought to the board in private." "I tried that, Brenda," Carol replied. her confidence growing. "You ignored me. You hid the records. But the bylaws state, this meeting is for the members to discuss the business of the association. And this is business." She turned to the audience. "I believe our HOA president has engaged in a severe conflict of interest and has mishandled our funds. And we have proof." That was my cue. I stood up. "If I may," I said, my voice projecting easily across the room. "We've prepared a short presentation to clarify the situation." Brenda's face was a mask of fury. You are out of order." "This is my meeting," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Sit down." But it was too late. The residents were hooked. The words, mishandled funds and proof, had electrified the sleepy atmosphere. People were turning in their seats whispering, looking from Brenda to me. "What kind of proof?" someone yelled from the back. I didn't answer. I just walked to the front of the room, opened my laptop, and plugged the projector into an outlet near the podium. I aimed it at the large blank wall behind the head table. Brenda seemed momentarily paralyzed by my audacity. "Security! Someone stop him!" she yelled, looking wildly around the hotel ballroom. There was, of course, no security. Just a bored-looking hotel event coordinator by the door, who was now watching with keen interest. I clicked the first slide. A title appeared on the wall in big bold letters. "A review of our HOA's finances, transparency, accountability, and a conflict of interest." Brenda stared at it, horrified. My first exhibit was a simple pie chart, created by David, showing our landscaping costs compared to 3 other similar-sized HOAs in the area. Our slice of the pie was nearly double the next largest. The next slide showed the logo for Brenda's Blooming Business, LLC. Beside it was the public record showing the owner was Frank Miller. The slide after that was the family photo of Frank and Brenda, with the caption, "My favorite cousin, Bren." A collective gasp went through the room. "For the past 3 years," I explained calmly, using a laser pointer to highlight the key points, "our HOA has had an exclusive, no-bid contract with a company owned by our president's first cousin. This contract was never put to a competitive bid, in direct violation of the procedures outlined in our own bylaws." I then put up the invoices, one after another, showing the exorbitant charges for extra services. The 10-0 storm cleanup got an especially loud reaction. I could see my neighbor Sarah shaking her head in disgust. But the final exhibit was the masterpiece. I put the 2 versions of the board meeting minutes up side by side. On the left, the official, altered version. On the right, the original text recovered from the file's revision history, with the changes highlighted in red. "This," I said, circling the original text with the laser pointer, "is what the board actually voted for, to seek 3 competitive bids. And this," I moved the laser to the altered version, "is the document our HOA president falsified, to give herself the sole authority to award a lucrative contract to her own family." The room erupted. It wasn't just murmuring now, it was open anger. People were on their feet, shouting questions at Brenda. "Is this true? Did you steal our money?" Brenda stood frozen, her face pale, her royal blue pantsuit suddenly looking cheap and theatrical. Gary had shrunk down in his chair, trying to become invisible. Martha looked like she was about to cry. Brenda finally found her voice, but it was shrill and panicked. "Lies! These are all lies! This is a smear campaign by a disgruntled homeowner I had to fine!" she screamed. "It's not a lie, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I clicked to the final slide. It was a still frame from my security camera feed. A crystal-clear, high-definition image of her, dressed in black, creeping across my lawn at 2:17 a.m. This is a picture of our HOA president trespassing on my property in the middle of the night to intimidate me after I first started asking questions. Every document you've seen tonight is a public record or an official HOA file. We have copies for everyone. David and Carol started passing out folders containing printouts of all the evidence. The takedown was complete. The evidence was absolute, overwhelming, and now public. Brenda looked from the angry faces of her neighbors to the incriminating image of herself on the wall and seemed to deflate. her reign was over. Her little kingdom had crumbled to dust in the space of 10 minutes, all because she couldn't resist testing a security system that was, in the end, far smarter than she was. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. In the chaos that followed my presentation, a motion was made from the floor by a furious homeowner to immediately remove Brenda from the board for cause. It was seconded by about 20 people at once. A vote was called, and it was nearly unanimous. She was stripped of her presidency right there, in the middle of the rented ballroom, under the humiliating glow of a projector displaying her own misdeeds. Her husband Gary, seeing which way the wind was blowing, abstained from the vote and then hastily resigned his own position, muttering something about wanting to spend more time with his family. Martha, the timid book club lady, also resigned, looking immensely relieved to be free. In a single evening, the entire old guard was swept away. An emergency election was held on the spot. Carol, who had shown immense courage, was nominated for president. She was hesitant, but David and I and several other residents encouraged her, and she accepted. She was elected by a roaring acclamation. David, the retired accountant, was elected treasurer, a position he accepted with a grimly satisfied smile. A few other reasonable long-time residents filled the remaining seats. The revolution was successful. Brenda didn't stick around to watch. As soon as the vote to remove her passed, she grabbed her purse and practically fled the room, her face a thunderous mask of rage and humiliation. She didn't get far. As she was storming through the hotel lobby, she was met by the same 2 police officers who had visited my house weeks earlier. I had taken the liberty of calling the non-emergency line before the meeting started. I explained that I would be presenting credible evidence of felony document fraud and embezzlement at a public meeting, and that a police presence might be prudent to keep the peace. They had been waiting discreetly in the hotel bar. They intercepted Brenda, informed her that multiple homeowners wished to file a formal complaint based on the evidence presented, and began taking statements. Her night went from bad to exponentially worse. In the weeks that followed, the new board, led by Carol and David, conducted a full formal audit. What they found was even worse than we had presented. Brenda hadn't just been overpaying her cousin. She had been using the HOA debit card for personal expenses, gas for her Range Rover, expensive dinners, even a spa day, all categorized under administrative costs or community supplies. The fraud was deep and systemic. Armed with the full audit, the HOA filed a civil suit against Brenda to recover the misappropriated funds, which totaled over $150,000 over 3 years. They also turned over the entire file, including the evidence of the forged meeting minutes to the district attorney's office. Brenda ended up facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had first uncovered, she pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, was sentenced to 5 years of probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The last I saw of Brenda, she was overseeing a moving truck packing up her house. They sold it at a loss and disappeared. The white Range Rover was gone, replaced by a much more modest sedan. The reign of Queen Brenda of the cul-de-sac was officially over. The changes in the neighborhood were palpable. Under Carol's leadership, the HOA became what it was always supposed to be, a boring, functional organization that took care of the essentials and otherwise left people alone. The first thing the new board did was terminate the contract with Brenda's blooming business. They put the new contract out for 3 competitive bids, as the bylaws required, and hired a reputable local company for about half the price. Our HOA dues dropped by 15% the next year. The petty fines stopped. The atmosphere of paranoia lifted. People started talking to each other more. The neighborhood potlucks felt less like a command performance and more like an actual party. My security system, once a source of controversy, became something of a local legend. I had a few neighbors ask me for advice on their own systems, which I was happy to provide. My home was once again my sanctuary, quiet and secure. Looking back, it's ironic. Brenda's entire crusade against me started because she was obsessed with my security system. She was afraid of what I could see, what I might know. She trespassed on my property to test it, to find a weakness she could use to control me. But in doing so, she triggered a response far beyond a simple strobe light. She triggered a system of evidence collection and methodical analysis that she was completely unprepared for. She thought the fight was about cameras and bylaws, but it was about her own corruption. She picked a fight with a security expert, and he responded by exposing every single one of her vulnerabilities. In the end, my system performed its ultimate function perfectly. It didn't just protect my house, it protected the entire community from the enemy within. And I have to admit, there's a certain dry, professional satisfaction in that. She wanted to test my security, and she found out, to her ruin, that it was working perfectly. Thanks for sticking with me through this crazy story. Remember to hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one.